got quite a few bits and bobs today with some backup in among the presenters in case the technology doesn't work, but we appreciate your patience if we have a few pauses as we shift from slide to slide and tool to tool. And if you can't see anything on your screen, presuming you are actually looking and not just listening, please just let us know in the chat function so that the people who are behind the scenes managing the webinar can make sure that the tech is actually working for you. So in terms of the tools, we're going to speak first about the Social Enterprise Impact Lab. And one of the things I didn't acknowledge before was the huge number of researchers who have been involved in developing this work, and we'll hear from two of them in a minute, Professor Helena Skeepers and Dr. Kyros Hirai. The Social Enterprise Impact Lab basically came out of what I think is a very widely experienced discussion and concern about both the capacity and the capability of small to medium social enterprises to measure and communicate their social impacts. And we at CSI do a lot of commissioned evaluations for individual organisations and so on, but there are some significant concerns or potential problems with that approach. One is when there's a lot of individual commissioning of evaluation and impact measurement, then that information is usually held in the private domain, even if the organisation who commissioned it itself exists for public purposes. And that means that it can make it difficult for us to actually compare anything and understand at a sort of meta level the kinds of outcomes and impacts social enterprises are having, and also the barriers to those outcomes and impacts. Of course, there's also just the very obvious concern and problem for small to medium organisations, particularly in the civil society space, about operating in an environment where there's very few resources to get anything done. And as we've seen the increasing demand for social impact measurement and evaluation, there really is a cost impost associated with that. But in the Australian context, without making any comments on our funding partners, relatively limited or uneven commitment to paying for the costs of that work. And that creates real barriers and challenges for social enterprises of the smaller kind. The other thing that we're aware of from past research in this space is the level of churn and turnover that happens among staff within social enterprises and the social economy broadly, which partly reflects a very project-based funding approach to some of the discrete pieces of work that social enterprises do. Of course, notwithstanding that social enterprises are also generating revenue through trading. So the Social Enterprise Impact Lab was designed as a action research project working with the 5 organisations that I mentioned before. And technology is only one small part of SEAL. The purpose of the project was really to understand what are the measures that really matter in relation to measuring and evaluating social impact. And we started partly as a result of organisation interest and partly as a result of the funding source with employment, meaningful employment creation and pathways to employment. But of course, we quickly recognised that that's not nearly enough, even in those social enterprises that are specifically concerned with creating employment. They're also usually doing other things. So we widened that out. The work involved doing theory of change workshops with most of the participating organisations and or assisting them to refine or update their existing theories of change. Working with the organisations through peer-based workshops so that they could share insights and information with each other. And if any of you are here today, my apologies, it's a bit challenging to look at who's online as well as presenting, but if you are here, please feel free through the chat or Q&A, or particularly the chat function, to lob in any insights you've got. And when we get to Q&A later in the session, we'd really welcome input from any of the organisations who participated. Some of the key findings from the work, and then I'll hand over to Helena and Kyros to present the outcomes measurement tool, were not surprisingly those organisations that had internal evaluation or impact measurement functions and staff found this process more useful than those that did not. That's not particularly surprising. The other things that we know from doing this work is there's not a simple technological solution to the sorts of challenges that social enterprises are facing. But that said, there is more scope both within the tools we present today and in other technological solutions to do more using things like artificial intelligence and ensuring integration of operating systems across different functions of organisations. So there's definitely more that can be done than we've done thus far, but technology is not the only answer, and we're very aware of that. In terms of what we are showing today, I'll end before handing over to Kyros and Helena. I just want to flag a couple of things. One is that both of these tools are working prototypes. So they do work and we are proud of them. But one of the things about this sort of work is, of course, to fully maximise the value of online tools, you really need to capitalise them. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg issue in terms of, understanding what will be useful and then capitalising that as distinct from what may, ultimately not in the product itself be completely useful. So we've taken an innovation mindset to this. And by that, what we mean is that we recognise the value of learning, even if the tools themselves are not the silver bullet. We don't believe silver bullets are possible in this space, but that said, if the tools allow for active learning about what works in what context and why, that may ultimately lead to evolution of these tools, or alternatively, it may lead to creating knowledge and putting that into the public domain that is then taken up in the development of other tools in the future. We are not wedded in any commercial sense to the work that we have done to date. We are wedded to it from a learning perspective, and that's really our responsibility as university providers. The tools that we're presenting today are completely not for profit and at this stage freely usable to you. If we find that over time there is demand for them and there's demand for substantial development of them, we may at some point need to move to some kind of freemium model, but our strong goal is to create public value and to make things available that are useful to organisations such as some that are represented here today. So with no further ado, I will hand over to Helena and Kyros. We're going to hear from them. I'll quickly come back then to talk about the second tool, and then we're going to talk to our illustrious panel about their reflections about what's useful and what's also needed further in the space. Thanks.
Hi everybody, my name is Helena Skirbis and I'll be talking or demonstrating rather SEAL to you, and Kyros will come in on certain points, so we'll do a little tag team. Beck, if you can go to the next slide. Just a little bit of an overview of the SEAL tool. There's basically two sides to the tool, and the one that I'm going to show to you today is the one on the left-hand side that has got a screenshot there of the system that's more in green. And that is what organisations can use to upload their evaluation data. And on the right-hand side, there's a second part of the system, and that is for the researchers to get access to this data and to do some, all kinds of evaluation themselves from a research perspective. What is important to understand is that the data that the researchers can see will not identify organisations. It is anonymised. But that information is then available for us to look at all kinds of different things. Beck, if you can stop sharing now, then I will go into the tool itself to show you how that the tool looks. Okay, this is the front part, or the website. So there's a website that we have that gives a little bit of an overview of what the project was about, who is involved in the project, and probably the key thing that as part of this website is this resources page, where we've got already some resources for organisations to download and to look at. And as we develop more resources, we will add them to this page here, so that anybody that needs some background information or want to get some tips on how to do the evaluation, they can come to this specific website. So the key part of where the data will go in is what we call the SEAL platform. And I will just log in to the SEAL platform. So here is where we need to hold our breath. Here is where things can fall over. Okay, this is how the platform looks. The first thing here is we give a little bit of an overview of how this works and how you need to go about doing things. So the first thing to do is to go and look at the indicators and to choose indicators that is associated, with things that you would like to keep track of. Then the second part is to go and identify pathways of how these indicators link to one another. And the third part, and probably the most exciting part of this system, is the dashboard, where you can see trends and different illustrations of the data that you have keyed in. So I'm going to go through to the indicators, and here are some indicators that we've already keyed in, and I'll show you how to add an indicator, and I'll ask Kyros just to say a little bit about how we came up with this. For those of you that came to the trial, early trial of this, would probably notice that there's a significant change in the number of indicators and how they have been organized. So Kyros, if you can maybe talk about the indicators and how we came up with this.
Okay, thanks, Elana. So the indicators are benchmarked against, I think, lots of sources. For instance, there is a relationship with another kind of tool which amplify or FBS data, and in the future would like to link them to SDGs. So how it works is we have certain domains, and under each domain there are literally altogether hundreds of indicators. But at the same time, if some organizations feel that the indicator they are looking for is not there, it has also, they have the capacity to add whatever indicator they wanted to measure. I will stop there.
So I'll show now a little bit on how to, and I'm just choosing a domain here. I'll just go for health and well-being. So we've identified with the color range, the different aspects. So inputs, you can add anything that you want to have there. Outputs are all highlighted in green, and you can see here all the large number of outputs. Then go down, the outcomes are all in blue, and the impacts are in orange. So I'll just go up and choose this one, the number of beneficiaries referred to other support services. I click on that, and then it opens up this screen here where you can put in some information around that specific indicator. You can go and change the name of that indicator. I mean, this is a really long name, and maybe you have in your organization something else. So let's just go and change this one to say number of beneficiaries referred to support services. So what that means is if you then key in information around this indicator, that is what you will see there. Here you can put in where your the source for that. You can go and put in, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or yearly. I'm just going to say yearly there. And you can put in some baseline, some targets, and you can put some comment around that. And then you add that indicator. So that indicator will then appear in your specific domain. And then to add, so here you can see that there's some data that has been put in, already keyed in for some of the indicators. This one you can see there's no data keyed in, and to add that, you click on that row there, and this is what appears on the screen. And for you then to add data is, you just click on add row. I'm just going to choose something there. And then you click on insert, and that will appear there. If you want to put in another one, let's say last year's, I could go back to, let's say July. Just go down a bit. Let's make it the same. And let's say that was 250, and you can insert there. You can change the baseline, the target, the frequency if you want to change that from yearly or to monthly or quarterly, and also the source of that. The other thing that you can see here is it might be that over time, if an organisation uses this for a long time, there might be a point where they decide, well, this is not an indicator that we would like to use anymore, and then you can ask or click that this should be disabled. It won't take away the information that you've keyed in or put into the system up until that point. It will just, not take any further information around that. Then in terms of the pathways, we again use the color coding, where you've got your inputs, your outputs, outcomes, and impacts here. So here are a number of them. So I can just say, choose one here. You can go and change the name. And then you can add your indicators. So you can say, here's the whole list of indicators that you've got. Can add that to the, and you can have more than one, as I've just showed there. Let's say we add that one. And I'm just doing it at random because I've got a nice one that I've worked out very clearly for you to see at the end. So, and that is creating a pathway linking. So I think here, Kyros, I don't know if you would like to say something about the pathways as well.
So I think one of the differentiating factors from other tools that you might find online is that this goes from input to outcomes and to impact. This is a language that we normal people working in evaluation understand clearly. But at the same time, you are inputting indicators for each, and there is a pathway, a link between input, output, outcome, and impact. And for all the indicators, there is a background data or indicator bank which feeds into this. And that is benchmarked against some of the normal data sources. Thank you.
So after you've done that, then you can get to the dashboard, and you can click on the dashboard, and here are all the pathways that you have, that has been created for this specific organization. And I'm just going to choose, there's one of them that works. No. There we go. Sorry, pathway one, where I did created all of the data. And here you can see the different types of charts that you can have. You can have just for a specific indicator, and you can see how it changes over time. And that can be yearly, quarterly, monthly, or daily, depending on how that indicator, the data has been keyed in for that, or how you chose to do that. You can look at some, again, for a single chart, for a single indicator, whether it's gone up and down, and probably the more important ones would be the comparison chart, where you link specific indicators with one another and to see how they change over time through that. And here too, there's a line chart, and then there's also a comparison chart where you can have a number of indicators. Now, this one, you can see the name is very long. You can go and make that shorter so that you can see that what that one is, and that would be the purple line there. Yeah, that's all from me. I don't know if there are any questions around this, or we'll leave that to later.
Yeah, if anyone's got any questions, I can see a few are flowing in. Please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll come back. We've got time at the end of the session for some questions. And the marvellous Dr. Aurora Elms, who's you can see typing, is also going to be answering the technical questions that she can as we go. Thanks so much, Helena and Kyros, for taking us through this. We're going to move on now to the social entrepreneurship evidence space. I'm getting my acronyms and words wrong. Before we do that, just really quickly, I just wanted to add one thing on what Kyros was saying about the pathways. One of the reasons we've done that is because we know that some forms of social enterprise, particularly work integration social enterprises, because your social purpose is baked into your business model, it does actually affect the relationship between your inputs and your activities and your outcomes. So we wanted to make sure that we could actually visualize that. We're now going to hear from the marvellous Rebecca Hutton, who's the project manager for C-Space. And just to give you a very quick overview of why we did this particular product or how it came about, this was generated through a social enterprise evidence forum that CSI Swinburne hosted in August 2019. And I imagine some people who are in the webinar today were at that event. Among a number of things that we picked up, there was absolute consensus that there was no coordinated place for evidence about social enterprise and social entrepreneurship as it pertains to Australia. And on a personal note, I really wanted there to be one, because when there isn't a coordinated source, we go looking for each other. And I'm one of the people that you all go looking for. And I would field at least 10 cold requests a week about evidence on social enterprise. And really, I'd like just to have, as much as I love talking to people, I'd like to have just slightly fewer of those requests. So we're hoping that this tool provides that source of information in a more efficient way, so that the points of connection are then meaningful. And I can see Nick Verginis is agreeing with that particular challenge. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Beck, who's going to take you through C-Space.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Rebecca Hutton, and I've been working closely alongside Aurora Elms and Joe Barrackett and a host of universities and other organisations to bring you these tools, to bring you C-Space, sorry. I also assisted as a research assistant building the SEAL platform, but today I'll be introducing you to C-Space and just demonstrating some of our key features. So C-Space is the social entrepreneurship evidence space. Essentially, we're a searchable website listing evidence related to social entrepreneurship in Australia. We want to be a one-stop shop for a range of stakeholders in social entrepreneurship. And our stakeholders will range from not-for-profit staff, researchers and policymakers, social entrepreneurs, and people working in social enterprise. We want C-Space to include both academic and non-academic resources, whilst maintaining high standards of rigor and strong evidence base. And this means including scholarly journal articles, as well as industry reports, right through to infographics, fact sheets, online tools, webinar recordings, and then just taking quick insights and statistics from our reports. So today I'm going to be walking you through the basic architecture of the site. And I'll just reiterate what Joe said, that this is a working prototype, and we hope for the website to be a live and ongoing process. So what I'm about to show you is not comprehensive in content. We've collated around 70 resources to begin with. This is just a starting point, and ideally we want to share this with our stakeholders and other researchers to keep building the collection. While I share my screen, I'm just going to turn my camera off. So hopefully you can all see the homepage there. So this is now live at cspace.com.au. We've categorized all of the resources a few ways to try and make it easy for people to find what they need through browsing and searching. So our key domains are impact areas, collections, and user type or insights for. So for example, if you're interested in social enterprise, you can just browse the collection like this. From here, you can filter the resources. So this is all our social enterprise resources. You can filter these by the type of resource. So for example, if you were looking for infographics, and you wanted to see this one here, Community Recycling Enterprises Impact Management. I'll just show you this one as an example. This is a resource page. Each resource page contains a short description, the author's names, some tags, and their related work, or the related work to the resource. The infographic itself is just shown here as an external link. So clicking this takes you straight to it. So this is the infographic. It's exactly the same for journal articles, reports, or whatever the resource is. And the external links arrangement is just a standard copyright requirement. Sorry. So author names are also tagged. So if you want to see their other work, I'll just show you Joe's as an example. So this takes you to a profile page. There's space for an optional bio, a photo, links to their researcher profile, so their LinkedIn or whatever, and also all of the work they've contributed to the site. Just back on the home page, we also have a search function, and this allows you to look up keywords. This is really helpful if there's a specific project that you know about. So for example, if you're interested in the Map for Impact project, you can just search this and everything to do with this project will come up. And again, you can just filter this by resource types. Okay, so as I said earlier, we're hoping for the website to be a live process, and we want researchers and practitioners to be actively adding and suggesting the resources as they go. Now, I don't have time to take you through everything today, but I will just show you that process a little bit. Now, anyone can submit a resource so long as it's relevant and appropriate and fits all of our criteria. And these are just linked on the website under our research guidelines. And you can also here find a submission form. So the form just asks for some basic information about the resource, and it asks for a quick blurb that will show on the page, just like I showed you earlier. And then we also ask that you nominate a collection, a target audience, location, and population groups that the researchers might be appropriate for. And these will just appear as tags on the resource page. We also just have some space on the form to leave feedback, and we welcome feedback and ideas on the categories and the tagging as well here. And from here, our idea is that someone from the team will screen through the suggestions and add the piece to the collection on an ongoing basis. I'll just take you back to the slideshow. All right, so that's all I have time to really show you today. But any questions about submitting research or anything about the platform, you can just contact us at this email address. That's sees@swin.edu.au. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Beck.
Back to Joe.
And thanks everyone who are raising questions, etc. We're not ignoring you. The plan is to have our panel discussion and then return to the presenters and the panelists for responding to Q&A. And as you can see, Aurora is answering some of the technical questions as we go along. I'm really pleased that we've got Dr. Catherine Brown, OAM, CEO of Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, with us, Alison Wainwright, CEO of Family Life, and Amber O'Connell, who's played multiple roles in the social enterprise team in the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions, who've all been actively involved in not just handing over money, but having a real interest and engagement in the development of this work. So we're really pleased that you're here, and really just wanted, I guess, to get some reflections from you on these tools, and also not just the tools. We don't want to turn this into an advertorial. It's really about the wider issues raised by impact measurement and data management and evidence sharing in relation to social entrepreneurship. So I might start with the first question, which is really around what motivated your organisation to be a founding partner to these tools or tool, noting that not all of the participating organisations are founding partners to all of them. And I might start with Catherine on that question. You're on mute, Catherine.
Sorry.
There we go.
There we go. Thank you, Joe. That was both of those presentations were great. It's so interesting to see, how far it's all come, and it's so useful. You can just see how people will be able to use it very easily and share information, which is great. So the first question about why we were motivated to be a founding partner really is that the foundation has been supporting social enterprises in the social enterprise sector really for 10 years, and really committed to it both for the social or environmental impact that can be achieved, and also the potential to provide another source of funding for charities as well. So there's sort of a double reason, but the social and environmental impact is very important. And maybe to add that we have made some impact investments as well. So we're increasingly seeing sort of the social impact or environmental impact lens across our granting and the investment. So it's a very interesting time for philanthropy. So in terms of, we have a commitment to both funding innovation, but also capacity building. And I think we would start by saying this is building the capacity of the sector. And when we heard about the Social Enterprise Impact Lab idea, it just seemed like such a wonderful opportunity to build a tool that people can use freely and adapt for their own impact reporting. It's clearly, so it's supporting both, as Joe said, the innovation mindset, but it's also supporting capacity building. So from my perspective, the impact reporting, and I think we had some initial discussions with SEAL when it was starting, it's important that there's a number of levels to it. And this might be obvious to people on this session, but first of all, that the reporting helps the social enterprise itself to continually strengthen service delivery for its clients and the community. And those indicators may have a lot of meaning to the social enterprise, but maybe not to the other stakeholders, but they're still very important. And then more broadly, there's sector-wide impact and being able to share the importance of the social enterprise sector, across Australia. I think that's very important, and certainly with the social impact investing task force that I was involved in, and our reports being considered, that idea of being able to document the impact of social enterprise is really important. And then there's this other level, which is the funders. And so whether you're a foundation or whether you're government or whether you're potentially a impact investor, sort of from a commercial point of view, the impact reporting is absolutely critical in terms of demonstrating why the funders should support your social enterprise and also why they should increase their support to enable scaling up. And it's also important because it might end up leading to some social procurement opportunities, or it may end up being able to demonstrate that a social impact bond could be developed. So, in summary, good impact reporting for a social enterprise could result in the enterprise becoming contract or investment ready, as well as being able to demonstrate impact to traditional sort of philanthropy funders. So I think that's a really critical area. And we have got the ability in philanthropy to support these sort of sector capacity building projects. And they're not, these are not the projects that the general public, in fundraising campaigns are necessarily going to relate to. They're too practical, perhaps. They're not animals and they're not children, and they're about infrastructure, really. They're community infrastructure. So we're very keen on supporting those, and particularly where there is this open access and open source and sharing of knowledge element. That's really critical for us. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine. I mean, some really important things in there, linking back to the tools as well. So, I think one of the things that you've highlighted is that the demands from stakeholders for impact measurement are sort of growing and morphing all the time. And that can cause some ontological anxiety, to use good academic lingo, for organisations who are trying to work, across multiple revenue streams with multiple stakeholders, as well as their communities, and actually working in community to do work that is meaningful, not just measuring it but improving. So there's definitely some issues there. And I think the other thing you talked about, which someone's asked a question about in the chat, is around the aggregation potential of particularly the Social Enterprise Impact Lab. And we want to make sure that we need to protect privacy, and I can see someone's asked a question about that. And we need to make sure that it's absolutely informed consent. Those organisations that do allow us to utilise the data for not-for-profit research purposes. But I do think that one of the values of these kinds of tools is the back-end aggregation that happens. And if a lot of organisations are using them, we'll be able to survey you less and generate insights more. On that note, thinking about practice, I would like to move on to Alison and put to you the question about why Family Life opted to be involved in SEAL, acknowledging that, Alison, you were not in the hot seat when it started, but you are now the driver.
Yeah, thank you, Jo, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. And yes, to that note, I'd like to acknowledge the work of my predecessor, Jo Kavanagh, who led a lot of this work in the organisation. Very happy to be the driver now that I get to see the amazing outcome of where we've landed. So I want to acknowledge that. Why would we come on board? Family Life has always had social enterprises central to our core business. We're 50 years old last year, and I think social enterprises probably close to that, running our opportunity shops from very early days. So it's always been core to our business model, or our purpose, I should say. And we've always been acutely aware that our social enterprises generate a whole range of social impacts for community. We obviously the financial sustainability, which supports project work in the organisation, but far beyond that, looking at how we know our social enterprises support equity, access, great opportunities around social isolation, skills building, movement to employment. So we've known this for a very, very long time. but like so many others, have always been challenged a little bit around how do we tell the story of that enormous impact, and how do we come together and begin to measure that. So for Family Life, it was a real a connection point, I think, in terms of coming on board as a founding partner. And we have been able to look at our existing theory of change for our social enterprise and look at how we can map that up against the piece of work that you've spoken about. So we're really excited around how we can breathe life into it for Family Life and begin to input our indicators and begin to measure our practice. Because ultimately, to pick up much of what Catherine's spoken about, we believe that the success factor for our social enterprises is being able to access diverse forms of funding. So that would include investor funding, government funding, and to do that, we have to tell the story of change and the impact of our social enterprises. So I think certainly this tool will take us a long way on that journey. And I think from the presentations this morning, you can see how easy to use it is. So very adaptable and something that we want to embed within every element of our social enterprise, but also use that strategically to implement continuous improvement strategies for the organisation around how we best measure what we're doing, how can we improve, and how can we partner with others in that space. And I think also just to share, COVID has been a particularly difficult year, the last 18 months or so, very difficult for social enterprises across Victoria, particularly with our long lockdowns. But in many ways, it has been an opportunity to reflect on the value of social enterprises. And I can share with you that for Family Life, when we had to close our social enterprises during lockdown period, we really acutely became aware of the social impact of those social enterprises, because very quickly we had participants who were coming forward with significant social isolation, loneliness issues, disconnect, the loss of skill capacity that we saw. And yes, I think even though there were challenges, we come out of it quite inspired around how can we strengthen and grow our social enterprises so that they remain central to the core purpose of the organisation. So, you know, I think community activation is so important for most of our social enterprises, as well as investment and government partnership. So I think being able to tell your story and measure your outcome is so critical. So it's been a great journey, Jo.
Thanks, Alison. We're really glad you're involved. I think it's telling. I can see that Wade Kelly's asked a question about the differentiation between the SEAL tool and other tools in the market. I think, as we said at the beginning, Wade, we're not seeking to pitch this. This is not an advertorial. But that said, I think one of the things that I really loved about this is that Family Life was both a funder and a partner in the action research. And, you know, I think that the action research element means that the underlying taxonomies of this work are pretty strong, although obviously not comprehensively so, because 5 social enterprises cannot represent the need of 20,000 social enterprises. So we'll turn now to Amber, and from a government perspective, with oversight of or stewardship of the Victorian Social Enterprise Strategy. And Amber, acknowledging that DJPR has been involved in investing in C space rather than SEAL, but by all means, feel free to say what you would like about either.
Sure. Thanks, Jo. Well, I'd probably just start by saying that the Victorian government is very focused on driving a more inclusive economy and inclusive recovery, but that's not just a recent thing. I mean, the support for social enterprise in particular was really formalised back in 2017 when we launched the first Victorian social enterprise strategy, which was the first of its kind in Australia, and shortly thereafter came the social procurement framework too. But back in those early days, as we said about implementing the strategy, accessible research and evidence was something that we really didn't feel that we had a lot of at that point. We felt quite constrained by that. So one of the early and really significant outputs of the current strategy was the Map for Impact project, which the Centre for Social Impact, of course, carried out and features on the C space. But that was back in 2017, and it provided a really, I guess it was in large part for government, but it was also for the sector, really comprehensive and rigorous data that was around the characteristics and contributions of Victorian social enterprises. But I mention it because it was a particularly valuable piece of work for government as policymakers and program implementers, but it also demonstrated the value of applied research for public policy and sector development more broadly. So that lack of data and accessible evidence really constrained our ability to be able to make effective public policy, in government, but it also became clear that it was really limiting the sort of dissemination of good practice, and more broadly was also a disincentive to private and public investors to support the sector when there wasn't enough strong evidence behind it. So over the past year or so, we've been developing a new social enterprise strategy. The first one ends quite soon. And in doing that, we had a renewed focus on looking at, okay, what kind of evidence and research is out there that we can use to develop this new strategy? Do we need to commission something new? But no, I mean, as Joe mentioned, there's actually a whole lot out there. It's just a matter of finding it, and not everybody can go Joe like she kindly allows me to do, probably too often, to find those things. But even when it's there, can you understand it? I'm not an academic, and it's not always that easy to navigate, even if you can get access to those pieces. So what really appealed to us about the C space was that it was unlocking all of that, which isn't to say that that more data and evidence and research isn't needed in the sector, but unlocking and integrating what's already there, making it accessible to all sorts of audiences. So yes, policymakers, but also practitioners, investors, students, making sure that it can be found and used. Joe mentioned public value earlier. I mean, public value is what government is here to deliver. So being able to support a project that was both giving us what we needed, but also being able to, I guess, give that access and publicly available to everyone to use in support of a really thriving sector without having to reinvent the wheel was something that really appealed to us, and it made us very happy to get behind the project. So we really hope that over time that this limited data issue and the sharing of knowledge will become less of an issue, and we can all have excellent information to make really good investment decisions, business decisions, and see what's actually working well and also what's not, so that things won't sit on the shelf and actually get used, which surely is the point of research and a stronger sector.
Thank you, Amber. And I wanted to pick up on a couple of things you've talked about there. One is there is a lot out there, but we are actually also hoping that C-Space allows us to see collectively the gaps, and that will probably occur through requests and queries that come through the website, and then we'll actually have a sense of what are the applied research gaps that are not being met by the current evidence. And of course, we're academics and we believe in researcher-led inquiry, but we also believe in being responsive to what industry, broadly conceived in this case, tells us. And another part of the tool which we hoped to develop, but it was slightly out of scope for the working prototype, is actually an online dating function, which when I presented on this at the recent Connecting Up conference, got a big thrill of excitement, because we do think that, it's sometimes really hard to find researchers, and they may be university researchers, but they may not be, they may be in other sectors. And it can be hard for organisations to make meaningful contact, and, navigating universities, frankly, is tedious for those on the inside. So imagine if you're on the outside. And we are hoping that as we build out the tool, that we'll be able to add that function in, so that people can actually, connect up with potential researchers around topics that need to be attended to. And that's another part of it. I've got one more question for you. We've just got a few minutes for this, and then we do want to get on to the many great questions that people have put up, as well as others that people might have for the panelists. I'm just wondering, and Catherine, you already started to do this, but perhaps we could just quickly get each of you to reflect, and I'll go in a different order this time, on what the ongoing challenges are from your perspective in social impact measurement for social enterprise and or in relation to the collation and coordination of the evidence about social entrepreneurship. So I might just ask you to give me your top 2 rather than the full shopping list, and I'll start with Alison this time. Oh, Alison seems to have frozen. We'll hope she comes back. While she's unfreezing, we'll go to Amber.
Sure. Look, I'd probably reiterate some of the points that were made earlier, I think, around the social impact measurement, what we sort of grappling with within government is, I suppose, how to measure at an aggregate level, but also measure at an organisational level, and where do those two meet, given the diversity and breadth of different models and impacts that social enterprises are making, overlaid with the cost. So I think when it comes to tools like we're seeing here today that can help go away towards addressing some of those key issues. Really, at this point, with the evidence piece, I would say that further development of the tool would be something that would be great to see. So I'd love to know more about the speed dating and that other sort of functionality, but populating, really, I guess, maximising that access so that everyone can make better decisions. And as you spoke about the gaps, and I know we've spoken about the gaps before, Jo, but before commissioning new work, before embarking on new research and evidence, how can we ensure that we aren't rehashing things that have already been done, and fill those gaps? And again, not just so that certain users have access to that, but that the broader sector can tap in. Those are certainly big things on my list.
Terrific, thank you. And I think on the flip side, from the user perspective, is the producer perspective, and that's one of the things that this is illuminating for us. I mean, obviously we know that, generally speaking, the social enterprise researchers of Australia know each other because there's not that many of us. We've also had some quite legitimate feedback about, well, who is speaking for whom? You can start to actually see through the collation, some of the effects that I think in civil society we talk about a lot, about representation and whose voices are being heard, and how can we decolonise the kind of evidence that we have available. And so there are other sorts of values, I think, coming from some of this work. Alison, we're really glad to see you back after that quick freeze. Have you got a couple of top 2 challenges that you see going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Jo. Sorry, I hope I didn't freeze in an unfortunate position. And
no, you were fine. Your mouth was closed.
Oh, good. I suppose I'd like to reframe them as opportunities, possibly, rather than challenges. I really think collaboration is an opportunity. So, I, like Amber, am interested in the speed dating kind of model. At the end of the day, we have to get better at telling our individual stories of impact, but we also have to talk about the collective impact of social enterprise in Victoria. So how can we partner and create common voice around that? Because I think there's an incredibly powerful story to be told as we speak to influencers in government, stakeholders, in philanthropy, but also community, because community are massive supporters of social enterprise. So I think getting better at telling our story and creating that story of collective impact. So I would love to continue the conversation around how we partner in that space. And I think further development of the tools and see where we go from there it should be the start of a journey. Particularly when I think of the journey Family Life's been on, it's a really, if you're a small social enterprise and you're starting from the first point, thinking about your own theory of change and mapping that out, you're going to have so many bumps on the road. We are still having bumps on the road on that journey. So it can be a lonely journey, and you need support and I think friendship on the journey. So I think collaboration and how we can start thinking about possibly communities of practice or supporting each other around implementation of this piece would be really important to me. So possibly a challenge, but I like to think of it as an opportunity. Jo?
Thanks, Alison. That's great. And I won't editorialise because I keep taking up time. Catherine, over to you for the last few words before we move into Q&A.
Thanks, Jo. Well, I might just build on both of those. I mean, the challenge really is to make impact measurement and evidence accessible and manageable, and it basically has to be easy. I mean, everybody's under budget and time pressures, so I love the, I think collaboration is critical. I've called it share the workload. So that would be a key recommendation, build on the Social Enterprise Impact Lab and look at some of the other tools, the Amplify Social Impact Indicator engine that's being developed. Then there's the big International Impact Measurement Project. I think it's important to connect in with the Sustainable Development Goals, because I think that's a shared language across sectors. And then my other recommendation just really is to build the capability of the social enterprise and charity sector more broadly in this space. One thing we've done is funded the Digital Transformation Hub, which will be launched in July, which is about upskilling the sector. So that's just an important area. But I really do believe that in 5 years, impact reporting and impact measurement, it will be business as usual in this sector.
Oh, that fills me with a bit of fear as someone who's supposed to be really good at it. But I don't disagree with you. So let's now move on to, there's a lot of lively action going on in the Q&A and chat functions. And just picking up on Julie's accolade to you, Alison, about communities of practice, I do want to also acknowledge with C-Space that it is a community of practice. The universities that have participated have all been data partners to this, and while we haven't exactly worked out the governance model yet, because we do want to make sure that the rigour of curation is maintained, we're talking as a collective about how this could be stewarded and hosted over multiple years. So CSI Swinburne is responsible for it for the next 2 years. Our colleagues at Griffith University have kindly, informally, I'm not going to hold them to it, indicated a willingness to then become the subsequent stewards. And we would really like to put this particular tool into the Creative Commons if we can, while ensuring that the rigour of curation is retained. So, because I think we need to do that across the board. I mean, you just talked about sharing the load, Catherine, and it's the same in academia. We need to be generating public value together, and the only way to do that is actually collaborate with each other. So Aurora, you've got you're in the hot seat with Q&A. What would you like to direct to whom?
Thanks, Jo, and thanks for your patience, everyone, while I was flipping between the chat and the Q&A. But I have made a note of a few of the questions that came through, and one of them was for Kyros around whether the SEAL outcome measures and indicator measures align with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and whether it can measure an organisation's impact for each of those 17 goals. So I'll hand over to Kyros to respond to that.
At this stage, it doesn't measure the actual impact of an organisation related to the 17 SDGs, but we have tried to link the 13 domains of SEAL, there are only 13 domains in SEAL, to each relevant SDG. For example, work and employment is linked to Goal 8, which is economic growth and employment, similar. So there are links to that at the indicator level. So we have an indicator library. At some point, we would like to create either a searchable type of resource so that we could put it on the resource for people to see the different indicators. So at this stage, not specific indicator and organizational impact, but that's how it is.
Thanks, Kyros. And another related question that you might have touched on in your presentation was around whether the SEAL tool is linked to the IRIS impact tool. indicators. I think you did mention something about that. Was there anything else you wanted to add around the IRIS impact indicators?
I mentioned Amplify and others. I think Amplify is a CSI kind of similar tool, but it measures impact at not at the organizational level. It's broader. It might go down. So there is a link between the different indicators. So you can actually connect the links for benchmarking, and they are aligned altogether. That's what I want to say, but not with IRIS.
I would add to that, for those who are not aware, the Amplify initiative, which is led out of CSI, UNSW, the tools aren't fully released yet, but we've done our best with SEAL to ensure integration so that we're not recreating the wheel, and so that there is, you know, some complementarity between the two tools. You will, if you have not yet seen an Amplify Roadshow, I thoroughly encourage you to do so. It's a product that has multiple parts to it, and a substantially larger budget than the SEAL prototype work. So it looks fabulous, and we are very hopeful that there's going to be lovely synergy between the tools once they're all ready for release.
Thanks, Jo. So another question we had was around someone who was wondering, does a tool like SEAL support theory of change development? And I just wondered if Kyros and Helena, you wanted to comment on this, because I know that when we did workshops with some organisations, these kinds of questions came up. So would you like to respond to that?
Yes, it does. So in theory of change, basically, if you're starting from the end to understand what kind of activities and what kind of outputs and impact will lead you to what you wanted to achieve in the end. So you have to map it yourself. But once you have that, that means you can then, you will be able to measure it through this system. It's not a tool for people to develop theory of change, but it can inform the theory of change, and you can also measure what you said you would achieve through your theory of change through this tool.
Yeah, and there are some additional resources on the website as a whole, fact sheets and tips, etc. And going back to my own comments earlier about there is not a single technological solution to all of this, one of the things that we're aware of and would love to build out into the site is, you know, you get to a part of it that makes no sense to you because you're not a specialist in this area. Up pops a, you know, do-it-yourself video or tool, or I mean, you know, template survey, etc. And noting that Amplify is actually going to have some of that functionality as well. You know, you can't solve everything with technology. It's the relationship between people and technology that's going to make the difference. So we think that there's a lot more value that can potentially be added to SEAL Beyond Working Prototype, and some of that will be in the reporting tool, but some of it will be in the additional elements that are on the website as a whole.
Thanks, Jo. So I'll just jump to another question, which I did answer in the chat, but I think it's worth just mentioning for everyone. So there was a question around whether C-Space is centrally curated, or do we plan to have user-generated content? And as Jo and others have mentioned, including Beck, the intention is that it's a community-informed process. So we really encourage you to jump onto the C-Space website and use the submit research button, or ask a question via the email that's listed there if you have another question to add. So I'll pop the link to the submit research page into the chat for anyone who'd like to have a look, and absolutely encourage you to get in touch if you're not sure. Happy to hear from you there. And we did have another question around whether it's possible to get an export or resource files of the indicators that were developed for the SEAL tool. So I'm going to hand this over to Kyros to respond to as well. This person was interested in the details of the outcomes and impacts so that can be mapped and compared and reported across the sector or beyond the sector with other frameworks and tools like the Sustainable Development Goals. So Kyros, did you want to respond to that question as well?
So if we are thinking in terms of what organizations can export on Excel, you can export your own data on Excel. That's what it does, not any other data. At this stage, the SEAL platform doesn't have capability. We haven't included for people to download the indicators or what we call the indicator library. That could be shared separately, not like that as a resource. That's why I earlier mentioned that we are thinking in terms of whether we need to include some search functions for it to be searched that too many of them, or whether we want to share it in Excel format.
And I would add on that, acknowledging that LMCF and Family Life are co-owners of the IP that's been created in SEAL. We need to do that in collaboration with them, and we are really committed to public value. We're also committed to a good integration with the other CSI tools. So I suspect that we really need to see the integration between Amplify and SEAL before we, share the indicators bank with the world. But that said, you can certainly register and go in and look and use the indicators bank at this stage.
Thanks, everyone. There has been another question around how the tool tackles social procurement outcomes, and this was from Julie. I am guessing that this is in relation to the SEAL platform. So Helena or Kyros, do you want to respond to this, whether there's capacity to look at social procurement outcomes or just direct outcomes from the organisation itself?
Can I be a control freak because I'm the social procurement specialist in the group? I'm concerned my colleagues will just go, oh, we don't know. We're conducting a research project at the moment on the implementation of the Victorian Social Procurement Framework, and this has come up in discussion. There's clearly some challenges in terms of this area because there are different needs for different stakeholders. So tier one suppliers are looking for different kinds of measurements to government buyers. And again, then at the level of for benefit providers, some of whom themselves are tier ones, but not that many. We're only just getting that insight right now. So what I'd say is that there's nothing about SEAL that isn't usable in terms of a small to medium social enterprise demonstrating its impacts. But I do think that, my immediate reflections on the work we're just literally finishing at the moment is there would be more to do. In a sense, it's sort of like the needs of social enterprises and their communities came first, then the needs of funders and social impact investors came second, and now social procurement is another horizon where we need to rethink what sorts of output and outcome measures are needed. So a bit more work to do.
Thanks for jumping in there, Jo. That's great. So I'm conscious of time. Do you think we have time for one more question? Or do you want
one more and then we'll wind up.
Okay. So I might combine two questions together. So one question came from Tanya early on around whether the SEAL tool was only for social enterprises or can not-for-profits use this tool as well. And then we've had a question in the chat from Susan around wondering whether the social impact of our universities could be measured. So I wonder if Kyros or Helena might like to respond to that, whether the scope goes beyond social enterprise for that tool.
I think you, at the organizational level, you should be able to measure for other organizations, but we also recognize that social enterprise have different needs as hybrid organizations. So some of the indicators or domains were designed with that specific nature of social enterprise in mind. So you will find out that some of the indicators may work better for social enterprise, but you have the capacity to add your own indicators. That way, it's adaptable in that sense.
And under my definition, universities are social enterprises, but this tool's been particularly developed for small to medium social enterprises. What we find is that larger scale entities tend to use corporate products and are quite happy with that. So that's not been the audience or user focus for these tools. But we're always happy, although those of us in the university sector seeing that question, we're all like, Susan, we're all going, oh no, You know, there's a lot of headaches around measuring the impacts of research, education and community activity of universities at this stage. We'd really like to thank you all for being here. I'd particularly like to thank our panelists for your really insightful contributions. Everyone who's helped make these tools possible. It takes multiple villages, and some of you are here today, and we really appreciate your contributions. And my thanks to all of my colleagues who've presented and managed things behind the scenes today. Thanks for being here, and we look forward to any further feedback you have through the tool sites.